While I make every effort to broadcast correct information, I'm also still learning. I will double check all my facts, but realize that healthcare is a constantly changing science and art. One doctor or healthcare provider may have a different way of doing things from another. I welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. I take no money from supplement or device companies. By listening to this podcast or reading this blog, you agree not to use this podcast or blog as medical advice or to treat any medical condition in either yourself or others, including but not limited to patients that you are treating. Consult your healthcare provider for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast or the website. Under no circumstances shall any guests or contributors to the podcast or blog or any employees, associates, or affiliates of the Boss Body podcast be responsible for damages arising from use of the podcast or the blog. This blog or podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing the standard of care in a legal sense or as a basis for expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or the blog. Hey guys, it's Dr. Tim Jackson, host of the Boss Body podcast, here for another episode. Today, I have another very special guest with me, Dr. Dana Cohen. Dr. Cohen has worked side by side with the late Dr. Robert Atkins, a true pioneer in the field of integrative medicine. She's well respected by her peers and beloved by her patients. She is, above all, a clinician. She is an internal medicine doctor who spent her career focusing on problems utilizing the principles of integrative and functional medicine. She practices with an emphasis on the individual, understanding that no two patients are alike. Her results demonstrate that there is an art to medicine and a way to connect with patients that on a level much deeper than what is achieved through mainstream medicine. She focuses on nutrition and limits her patients' reliance on pharmaceuticals. She is a member of the American Board of Internal Medicine and certified by them since 1998. She's also on the board of the American College for the Advancement of Medicine, the leading voice of integrative medicine for 4 years. She is currently an advisor to their board of directors and on the education committee. She has published a best-selling book called Pure Hydration, and she's a paid expert for Essentia water. She has a whole other list of accomplishments that we'll save for another time. Welcome, Dr. Cohen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for being here with us. We want to talk about all things hydration, and we thought, no one better than you. I haven't had a chance to read your book yet, but it's on the list of things to do. And I want to start out with a little story that happened in 2019. I won't say the name of the product, but I was drinking a ton of hydrogen water, and I was working out. It was the middle of the summer. I was sweating a ton, and I wasn't replenishing my electrolytes. I went to take a bath one morning. I couldn't raise my hand very high to reach for the phone. Took me a few minutes. I was able to dial 911, got taken to the ER. My potassium level was 2.2. And to put it in perspective, I couldn't move my extremities at all. And the ER doctor, the attending who came in, was ready to do a spinal tap. So overhydration and just pounding tons of water without drinking electrolytes is not necessarily a good idea. Would you agree?
I totally agree. And I talk about this often, almost every podcast that I'm on. I talk about overhydration because, right now there's a gallon water challenge going around where they're saying drink a gallon of water, and they don't differentiate between bulk tap water and, water that's replaced with electrolytes. That is a very dramatic story, but it goes to show you that we can overhydrate. And the biggest problem with overhydration is losing electrolytes. So when we drink so much bulk water, and especially with like these reverse osmosis filters, which are fantastic, but we need to replace some of those electrolytes that are, that we're not getting it. That reverse osmosis takes out everything, including minerals. So, you know, I tell people to always put maybe their first glass of water, put a little pinch of real salt, full spectrum salt, like Himalayan pink salt or sea salt or rock salt. There's a brand called Real Salt that I love, which has that whole full spectrum of minerals. That's a great way to start your day. A squeeze of lemon. But yeah, overhydration, and I see it at least once a week, not to that dramatic of what you said. And by the way, that's life threatening.
Yeah.
That potassium level is absolutely life threatening. And crazy story. Like that's just nuts. Like you're very lucky to have been able to get to their phone and dial that 911. But on a weekly basis, I see electrolyte disturbances in people's bloods to a minimal effect, where I say to them they have a minorly low sodium, a minorly low chloride, and maybe a little bit low potassium. And I'm like, how much water are you drinking? Like, oh, I drink so much water. I drink water all day long. But they don't replenish their electrolytes. So what we thought was pretty rare, there's a term for it. It's called polydipsia, where we drink too much bulk water. Um, and it's not as rare as we think. So we need to. The overhydration is absolutely a problem, and today we're going to hopefully learn what's the best way to hydrate. And I think the more important thing though is not to be afraid of overhydrating, but to really be afraid of dehydration. That is the single most important thing. Learning how to hydrate properly is the single most important thing we can do to treat and prevent chronic disease. Before you start on any exercise program, lifestyle program, nutrition program, you need to start with hydration first. It's that important.
So I know you can look at electrolyte levels in the blood, obviously, but do you recommend testing for red blood cell sodium, red blood cell potassium?
Not on a regular basis. No, no. A simple potassium. And the red blood cell. There are certain things that might be a little bit better, like magnesium and calcium, maybe, or even an ionized calcium might be a better way to look at it. But a plain old um, uh, Chem 7, which is basic electrolytes, is enough. Yeah.
Okay, great. Do you have any other, let's say, non-blood tests that you use to
So
check?
such a great question. All right, so let me first say that unfortunately, there is no perfect test to look for. Well, first, let me take one more step back. When I'm talking about dehydration, I'm talking about it in a subclinical way, right? So, overt dehydration, when somebody is overtly dehydrating, they've been, vomiting all day long because they're sick and their eyes are rolling back in their head and they can't think straight and that is a medical emergency and needs to go to the emergency room. We all know what that is and what that looks like. Their blood pressure's in the gutter. This subclinical or low grade dehydration is something that happens to us every single day. And this is the thing that I'm talking about. This is the thing that we need to prevent. We need to stave off before it happens and stay on top of our hydration every single day, every single hour of every single day. So, with that being said, there is no great one single test to look at that. There's not a lot of great tests for that. So we need to look at maybe some symptoms and signs of things. We need to live in our bodies, know what it feels like to feel perfectly hydrated, and stay on top of it and think about it all the time. It's the one thing that I'm a stickler for. I'm not a stickler for, let's say I put somebody on a low carb diet. I used to work for Dr. Atkins. So everybody wanted an Atkins diet, a ketogenic diet. And there's still some people that I use that on diet, maybe type 2 diabetics. I want to get their blood sugar under control, whatever it may be. So let's say I put somebody on a plan like that. And I just lost my train of thought. Where was I going with this? So I completely forgot where I was going. Oh, that's what I was to say. So I'm never that much of a stickler with diet. If you give, I'm a big believer in that 80-20 rule.
Mhm.
Give me 80% and I'm happy. With hydration, it has to be, you have to stay on top of it. I want more like 99 to 100%. So let's talk about signs and symptoms of dehydration. Sorry, my brain is just.
That's all right. Maybe you're dehydrated.
I think so. No, I'm not. Um, so, okay. If I had to well, let's talk about this, the big ones. Thirst. Let's start with thirst. I always tell people, if you're thirsty, you've gone too far. You've waited too long. We want to stave off that thirst. So thirst, there's a couple reasons why it's not so great. Number one, as we get older, we lose our thirst mechanism. We don't sense it as much as we did when we were younger. And number two, we can learn to override our thirst mechanism. So all of us who, like, you don't want to drink a lot before getting in the car to go for a long ride, or you don't want to have to get up because you're working so hard. You purposely make yourself dehydrated or don't drink as much because you don't want to be bothered to get up and go to the bathroom. So we can over time, we can learn, like a habit, to override our thirst mechanism. So thirst is not the best thing. um, Another big thing that people tend to look at is the color of their urine. That's decent. It's not great though, even though I used to always say, like, oh, if you take a B vitamin, the color of your urine is really yellow and bright orange, so all bets are off with that case. But our if we're dehydrating, our urine does tend to concentrate, it tends to change color, but they've actually have looked at some studies, and it's still not a great thing to follow. But if you wake up in the morning, look at your pee. It's definitely a darker, more concentrated color. We want our pee to be a nice light straw colored. If our pee is crystal clear, like it started off dark in the morning and now you're drinking so much water that it's crystal clear, it might be a sign of overhydration. You might be hydrating too much, maybe. Not the best thing, but something to think about. Um, Symptoms and signs. These are important. So the ones that we all know: constipation, headaches, brain fog, those are big ones. Like, that middle of the day brain fog, tell people, think about your hydration. Are you hydrated enough? Try hydrating better. That might stave that off. The other thing is hunger. We often mistake hunger for thirst, thirst for hunger. So instead of saying, like, oh, I think my blood sugar is dropping in the middle of the day, it very well may not be that. It might be that you're dehydrated. So try hydrating better.
Right.
I think the best thing that we can look at for to know if we are, oh, and muscle pains and muscle aches and all those things. And the only way I can tell people is try hydrating better for, and it takes 2 days or one day. Even you hydrate better for one day, you'll feel better. Know what it feels like to feel in your body, what you feel better when you're hydrated, and strive for that every day. But going back to the one thing, the best thing that we can look at is our urine output. So how much are we outputting, is a really important marker. So we are meant to urinate every 2 or 3 hours during our waking hours. And I even have some people do a little hashtag while they're sitting at their desk all day. Went to the bathroom, I'm going to hashtag it. So mark it up, see if you're peeing every 2 or 3 hours. I mean, I know there are days that I sit at my desk for 8 hours straight and never move. That's not good. That's bad. I'm not doing good that day. So I like this example. When you're going on a long plane ride and you don't drink because you don't want to disturb the person if you're in the middle seat next to you. Think about it. So number one, you're doing yourself a favor by getting up to pee on a 5-hour flight, and you're doing them a favor by making them get up and move, instead of sitting there all day. Um, so those are some really important signs and symptoms to look at for when to know if you're perfectly hydrated.
Great. Thank you so much for that explanation. I'm sure a lot of people are going to benefit from it because the traditional wisdom is half your body weight in ounces of water per day. If I hear that one more time, I'm going to scream.
Yeah.
Um,
I have something to say about that, because it's if you twisted my arm, and some people like need a number, they have to have a number, that's the number I'll give to them. However, think about this. If you're doing a ketogenic diet, it's more like 3/4 of your body weight in water, because it's such a dehydrating diet.
right.
So it's definitely not perfect. It's okay. It's not, and then the 8 glasses a day, it's actually in our subtitle. 8 glasses a day is not the way. I know people that 1 glass of water is all they need in a day because they are eating such hydrating foods, they're moving, they're healthy. And then there are people who need sometimes maybe even more than 8 glasses of water. But that is, how can you say 8 glasses of water when you have a 6'2" athlete versus a 5'1" female unfit person. Like you can't put the two, you can't just give that kind of number. Makes no
And let's
sense.
talk for a minute. A lot of people are confused about sodium. They've heard salt is bad, salt causes high blood pressure. But it's
Yeah.
really when you isolate, one electrolyte, you create imbalances. It's more so the ratio, and you have the sodium potassium pump, so you need both of them,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah, you need all of our electrolytes and minerals. So, you know, a better thing would be to say sodium is bad for you. You know, Sodium that's in all those ultra processed foods and fast food burgers, that's loaded with sodium. It's not low salt. When we're talking about salt, we're talking about, I use the term real salt, which is a brand of salt, but real salt is the full spectrum of minerals and electrolytes that's in real salt, and it's found in sea salt, it's found in rock salt like Himalayan pink salt or real salt brand, which is comes from the mines in Utah. So yes, and there's absolutely a difference. And besides, I want to just say that whole thing about salt being bad for you, there is research coming out that they're kind of wrong. Now, I don't want anybody who has high blood pressure to go against their doctor's wishes and start reintroducing a ton of salt into their diets. You should
Right.
talk to your doctor about it. But I don't think salt is the villain it once was at all. And most doctors are now coming around and agreeing to that.
Right. And do you have, or can you mention a brand of electrolytes that people say, you're on the go, you're a busy executive, you're an athlete, that you can toss in your water bottle?
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot of them out there. Full disclosure, I'm on the board of the one I'm going to mention because I'm on the board of it, and it happens to be great. So it's called Cure Hydration. They're little packets. They taste great. There's nothing artificial in them. They're sweetened with stevia. So there's some that are there's all kinds of different flavors, and they follow the World Health Organization's recommendations for rehydration in their packets, and it really is an excellent one. And there's a couple excellent ones out there, um, and there's a couple not so excellent ones that have all kinds of garbage in there, like fake colors and sweeteners and sugar. Now, and when we talk about electrolyte replacements too, I sort of lump it into the same category as sports drinks too. And we all know that there's a bunch of garbage ones out there, like the big brand name ones that have, you know, fake stuff and fake colors and tons of sugar, more sugar than we ever need. Now, that is a whole category, for the athletes out there. Sports drink rehydration is really a whole sort of study in and of itself. And we can't lump it into somebody who's just taking a sports drink to recover from their morning workout, or just even to hydrate, because they don't need the sugar. But real athletes do need sugar, some carbohydrates in their drinks. So it's hard to you do have to sort of separate the two, because sugar in your sports drink is not necessarily a bad thing. So I just want to be clear about that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned thirst and the thirst mechanism, how we become desensitized to it as we get older, how it doesn't function as well. What would you say is the most common sign of dehydration? Is it brain fog first, or is it differ from person to person?
Um, that's a good question. I would have to say I think it probably differs from person to person, but I think, I use this example a lot. I think that afternoon fatigue, or you could call it brain fog, I think is more often than not a sign of low grade dehydration. I mean, so much so that we know that just a 2% loss in hydration, this is the number that everybody uses, like especially if you're doing a hot yoga class or something, it's actually very easy to get to lose 2% of our whole body water. It's not hard at all. It happens to us all the time, day in and day out.
Right.
And brain fog is the first thing that we can see. So a little foggy brain, fuzzy thinking. Yeah, I think that's a real. I think that's probably. I would have to say, if I don't think there's any research in this, but I would say that's probably what it is.
Right. And for people out there, hopefully no one's drinking tap water. If you are, please stop. I read a study maybe 6 years ago. They looked at 8 or 9 major cities in the United States, and the average tap water had 9 prescription medication residues.
Yeah. Yeah. I just found out, unless you live in Nantucket, I went to visit a friend who lives in Nantucket. They have the most incredible water system I've ever seen. They filter their water through the sand. Like it's kind of amazing, but very few of us live in Nantucket. And New York happens to have good waters as well, but we don't know what's in our pipes. We don't know. So I think a good thing to look at is the Environmental Working Group, ewg.org, has a database where you can put in your town or your zip code and search and see what's in your water. Yeah, we certainly don't want another fiasco like what happened in Flint, Michigan, with lead poisoning and all those kids who are permanently damaged because of it. So, yeah, I think filtering water is important in most of the
Absolutely.
United States. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you mentioned reverse osmosis filtration. There's many different types of filters out there. For someone just getting started on maybe a health or wellness journey, and they don't want to get overwhelmed, what would be your first recommendation in terms of filtration?
So also, we don't we were very careful not to mention anything about this in the book. Quench is the book, by the way. I don't know if we even mentioned that. So we were very careful not to mention filters, because there is such a huge range of what you can buy, what people can afford. We wanted to make this available to the masses, this information. So once again, I send people to the Environmental Working Group, ewg.org. They have a list of filters by your budget, and they tell which ones are good, which ones are not. Some people can, all they can afford is an over-the-counter pitcher that you get for $29, which is maybe all you need. You want to look at what's in your water and what you need to filter out. um, we can't all afford reverse osmosis filters, although there are some very affordable over-the-counter ones, very affordable in the $200 to $300 range. So that might not be affordable for some. But still we can do this. So reverse osmosis gets out everything, including minerals, but it also gets out fluoride, and a ton of other bad uh, heavy metals and carcinogens and stuff like that, xenoestrogens, bugs, that kind of thing.
Absolutely, that's good because we want to make, like you said, everything available to the masses as much as we can. And the more people get into this, the more affordable it will be. I think more people now than probably ever are looking at ways to improve their health, and especially affordable ways. If
Yeah.
they have a large family, this information is super
Yeah.
critical.
I think an important thing to ask yourself too is how much money do you spend on bottled water? And do the math, and I think you'll be surprised that, only a few months of buying bottled water adds up to that filter,
Yeah,
that you could have bought.
and
So,
that's going to last you at least 10, 12
yeah,
years.
yeah.
So, one or two issues I wanted to bring up to you. One, antidiuretic hormone. So, for my listeners or our listeners, antidiuretic hormone, that's the hormone that coffee blocks. That's why coffee makes you pee. But some other things that can lower your antidiuretic hormone, at least in my world, mold toxicity. Those people, I've had it. So I know you go into the bathroom like literally every 5 minutes. And so there's a medication called desmopressin acetate that is often prescribed to help you retain urine so your osmolarity doesn't get thrown off. That and stealth pathogen called Babesia. They both can create sort of um, untreatable, not untreatable, but unrelenting thirst. So when people are drinking plenty of water, even with electrolytes, do you have other conditions that you look at? And that if they're still thirsty?
Oh, that's a really good question. So the other thing you forgot to mention is that our ADH lowers as we get older as well. Age naturally lowers antidiuretic hormone, or vasopressin is another name for it. So do I look at other conditions if somebody is thirsty, is super thirsty all the time, even though they think they're hydrating? It's interesting. You know, it so depends on the individual. If I have so many yogis, like my patients that are yogis that are doing all this hot yoga and saying, I drink so much water, I'm so healthy, and I can't quench my thirst. Those are the ones that are not doing, that are not replacing electrolytes. You have them do a little pinch of sea salt in a few of those glasses of water, not every single one. And they're like, oh, wow, my thirst is quenched. So I look for the easy things first, and then depending on, what other things. I mean, there is it's rare, but there's something called SIADH, syndrome of inappropriate ADH, and that's sometimes a tumor that can secrete, those kind of things. So that's not, yeah, it's not something that comes to the top of my head without really looking at the individual and getting the whole history and seeing what other clues are there.
You mentioned early on that if someone is on a ketogenic diet, it might be they need 3/4 of their body weight in ounces of water per day. So, can we talk a little bit about foods that are hydrating? Like obviously salads for hydrating, right? Fruits.
Well, I hope it's obvious. So yeah, so let's take a step back, because the whole reason I wrote this book is because there was recently discovered a fourth phase of water, by a very, I mean, and there's more than one scientist talking about this, but the one who's really brought it to light is Dr. Gerald Pollack. He is a world-renowned water researcher. Before him, I thought, and most people thought, that water exists in three phases: liquid, ice, and vapor, right? We all know H2O, that's how water exists. He's telling us, and many other scientists are telling us, well, there's a fourth phase of water. And in that fourth phase of water, it's believed it's how those H2O molecules are layered upon each other, how they're structured. And it's in that layering of those H2O molecules that they start to share electrons. And within that sharing, they have now different properties than regular water. So they can hold electrical charge, much like a battery, and they're pulling other electrolytes into the mix. So it's a little bit of a different property, and it's believed that it is in that form how water exists in nature. So, by the way, it's we call it structured water or gel water. It's also, Dr. Pollack calls it easy water, liquid
H3O2.
crystalline, H3O2. There's lots, and it's called H3O2 because of the sharing of the electrons. It's still H2O, by the way. Um, so yeah, so it's believed that, so think about, I like to use this example because I think it's crystal clear. When you open a cactus leaf, there's all this or an aloe leaf, right? There's all this gel that falls out of that aloe leaf. That gel is loaded with structured water, right? There's other properties to it, but it's just loaded with structured water. So it's believed in nature that's how water is found, and it's also believed within our cells that's how water is found. So when we talk about, from a cellular level, the best thing that we can do is eat more fruits and vegetables. Think about cucumber seeds, they're loaded with gel. Iceberg lettuce, it's so hydrating, it's in that structured form. So yeah, we want to eat our water is the best way to hydrate. There's no better way, because we're getting fiber now that's also going to hold on to that water, but it's going to get in our cells where we need it better, and it has electrolytes and minerals. So yes, that is the whole point of the book. So more best hydrating foods: salads, a plant-centric diet. We need more plants in our diet, in our diets. We need more plants. And that means it could be grains, it could be spices, it could be vegetables, fruits. We just need to eat more plants. And that is the whole point of the book. Now, that doesn't mean you can't eat any. I'm not a vegan. I never was a vegan. But vegans can do this, but also carnivores can do this. So it's just getting more plants into our diets.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, let's say I'm having a conversation with someone at my gym and they ask me, what type of foods I eat or nutritional template do I follow. And I tell them I eat organic. And they're like, oh, I didn't know you were vegan. You don't look like you're vegan. I'm like, no, I says I eat organic. Like, it didn't say anything about not eating meat. And so it's
Yeah.
interesting how people just interchange those two. But
Yeah.
go
I
ahead.
think we've become numb to some of these words. You
Yeah.
know, people, it's sort of thrown in our faces. And I think we've just become a little bit like, it's funny because even for a long time, I was afraid to even give this lecture to my peers, and meaning, my other integrative doctors, because I thought they were going to all roll their eyes at me. I'm recommending smoothies, green smoothies, and like these are people who know this information. But the truth is, we all need to be reminded of it. This is important information. I said the very first thing I said, the most important thing you could do to treat and prevent chronic disease is learn how to hydrate. That's a really powerful statement. Start here. This is easy. This is
Yeah.
not hard stuff.
So you've been out of medical school for a year or two, and so you've seen quite a few patients. We know you're 27, Dr. Cohen. Um, but I bring this up because I wanted to know, were you seeing certain trends in your patient populations, like during residency or your first few years in practice, that led you to being passionate about hydration?
It's hard to say. I went right out of residency to work for Dr. Atkins. Thank God. I'm so lucky that the whole trajectory of my medical career started early on. I didn't know what I was getting into, but I went right from residency. I saw an ad that said world-renowned wellness centers looking for a doctor, and I was like, "Ooh," in New York City, and I was like, "Ooh, that sounds cool." And I didn't know it was for Dr. Atkins. I happened to be on the Atkins diet at the time, in residency, feeling fantastic. And so I went, I spoke to him, I got the job, I took the job, and he changed the way I thought about medicine. It was completely different. We never talked about nutrition, we never talked about anything. So I've been really fortunate my whole career to meet motivated patients who are seeking my help. So I have a very skewed sort of answer to that, because the trends, I never really practiced regular medicine where I was not thrust into, the really bad nutrition people, except in residency. And I saw it in residency. I worked in the VA hospitals. I actually moonlit in the VA hospitals early on too. So I saw it there, but I'm fortunate enough to have people that are looking for change, seeking out change. So as far as what I've seen in my career, I can't honestly say that I'm the best person to ask for that, to ask that question to, because I have a skewed population.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that about the readiness to change. I interviewed neurologist Dr. Ken Charlin, from the Charlin Institute in
I know
Missouri.
him.
Yeah, okay. And
Mhm.
so, we were talking about the, 5 stages of change, and, if someone's in that pre-contemplative state, then, they're probably not going to listen or follow through and implement your advice. So you're very fortunate that you went straight from residency to working with basically one of the best integrative medicine doctors ever.
Yeah, he really was. He was such a character. He was quite brilliant. I think people didn't realize. I mean, he was. I don't. First of all, he was incredibly brilliant, incredibly charming, and incredibly fearless. I don't know too many people in this world who take on the AMA, the American Medical Association. When they came after him, he was like, "I'm taking you on," and he did. And it was incredible to see. I wish I had 1% of that fearlessness that he had. He was incredible.
Yeah. So, what sorts of things did you, outside of maybe the obvious, things that we've mentioned, did you learn from Dr. Atkins?
So much. Some of the things I don't even practice, because he had a huge cancer population that would come. And first of all, let me just say, I would say the Atkins Center was 5% weight loss, 95% holistic medicine. He would get people from all over the world with illnesses that I never saw in my residency at Albany Medical Center, which was a trauma center. He would have people with all kinds of rare diseases that he helped. He helped so many people. I say this a lot. I saw miracles on a daily basis. Miracle, just by changing somebody's diet, just by getting all the crap out of their diet, the sugar, like that alone, before they would even come back for their results, you would see miracles in that. He had an IV floor on, that was, I don't even know, it was an entire floor of IVs going, of cancer patients, and heavy metal patients. And I remember saying to him one time, and by the way, I fought him on everything. The first 6 months that I worked there, I was like, "Where's the studies? What are you talking about? What are you doing? What is this IV vitamin C? Like, where are the studies?" And he would laugh at me and he'd be like, "I want you to spend the afternoon. I want you to go downstairs and I want you to talk to everybody in those chairs and listen to their stories." So I'd go downstairs. God, it's such a gift now I think about what, what he gave to me. And I would go and sit and talk to this person who was diagnosed with metastatic colon cancer, given, 6 months to live 10 years ago. And I heard that story over and over again as I would speak to those people. And there was a room full of people that I spoke to often. So, the cancer stuff, which I never took on because it still is so scary to me. You have to know traditional treatment and holistic treatment if you're going to take on cancer. And it's a scary thing for me. Um, and so I I learned that the biggest thing I learned, diet, food is medicine, period. Food is medicine.
Ab-
And sugar is the enemy. That
Absolutely.
that was his big message to this world. It's sugar. And I'm talking about processed sugar.
Right.
Um, I will say throughout the years, what I have learned now over time, though, and this is going against is that, a ketogenic or an Atkins diet is not it's very difficult to live your life in that lifestyle. And it's very rare that somebody takes off the weight, changes their diabetes, and is permanently changed by it. And I don't have the answer to that, except maybe it might be cycling in a healthier way or learning how to cycle out of a ketogenic diet. That's what or learning how to properly eat to begin with,
Right.
more whole foods, hydration. I don't think we teach that enough. We talk
Right.
about a Mediterranean diet, but nobody really knows what that means, you know? So there is this whole real food movement that's happening where it's not there's no magic to it. It's eating more real food the way nature intended, right? That
Absolutely.
is that is everything. Less processed food. Eat some minimally processed food. People don't realize that olive oil is a minimally processed food, right? So we need some minimally processed foods and stay away from the ultra processed foods. The message of Mark Hyman and all those doctors are the message that we need to take. Eat the rainbow. These are all the big things, and we need to hear them over and over again, and really really understand what I'm talking about. We don't have to be on a ketogenic. We don't all have to be on a ketogenic diet.
Right.
It may not be as fast. Like, that's a pretty fast way to get some weight off for many people,
Right.
but it's the cycling in and out of it, and then the going up and down in weight, and that's the bad part.
People's microbiomes, or the bacteria in our large intestines, the most deranged microbiomes I've seen have been people who've been on a ketogenic or carnivore diet long term.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I think it's maybe not necessarily the protein and fat, but it's the absence of bioflavonoids with those things that creates the imbalance.
Yeah, there was just a really big study that has, my community really excited about, and there was a study that they checked people's gut microbiomes, and the people that had the most diverse, healthiest gut microbiomes are those that ate more than 30 different plants a week. So while that sounds like, oh my God, that's impossible, it's not really, because they're including grains. Like, grains, I don't know, it's not a bad word, so it's including grains, spices, nuts and seeds, fruits and vegetables, all plants. So you can figure out ways to mix it up and get 30 different plants in a week. You're doing your gut microbiome really good, important thing.
Absolutely. So, in your day to day practice, is there a major patient population that seeks you out, or do you really have a diverse patient population?
I have a I have a diverse population. I see everything. I'm an internist, so I treat adults. Um, but I would have to say, I think because of word of mouth, I have about 90% menopausal, perimenopausal women in my practice. That's mostly, but I love my male clients. I love my young people, and but I really do see everything, but and I also do a ton of hormone replacement in men and women. So, but men don't go to the doctor. So most men don't see the doctor.
Yeah, I hear that and I've seen it myself. I'm not kind of, I am the opposite. Like, I never saw, like, admitting that you have an imbalance or an issue as a weakness. I mean, it is what it is. Learn from it. You're either winning or you're learning. There's no such thing as failing.
I know.
And I mean, people wonder, like, oh, how do you know so much about all these different topics? I asked a lot of questions for a
Yeah.
lot of years. That's
Yeah.
the only way I learned.
Yeah. 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 I don't know why or what, but yeah, I do think it's changing too. I think, with all the podcasts and everybody talking about functional medicine, I think men are really keen to hearing this information too. So they're getting out there.
And so you have a physical practice in Manhattan?
I do. I'm in right by Columbus Circle, and Hell's Kitchen is the is the name of the community. And Yeah, I've been in New York for practicing for almost 25 years.
And so if someone who's listening wants to work with you or views this later wants to work with you, do they need to come see you once a year in person?
Uh, n- so the initial visit needs to be in person. I think it's in, and actually there's legalities around that. So the initial visit in person, and then we could do telehealth from there on in. But yeah, it should be at least one time in person. I need to just sort of lay my hands on you, do a physical, and the truth is, I think it does help. I'm a trained observer, as I'm sure you are as a podiatrist, so I think, that visit starts with me watching them get up and walk from the the office into my office and sitting down. Like I'm constantly, there's things that you can't see on Zoom, so
Right.
for lots of reason, it's a good idea to at least meet once in person.
Awesome. So we're gonna post your social media links, your website links,
Thank you.
and we'll have the transcript as well. And
Great.
hopefully, in the new year, or at the very least, 2024, we can have you back on again
I would love
and
it.
try to stay calm and relaxed in the mayhem that is New York City. I'm only kidding.
We had this conversation before the podcast started, and New York is back. Is all I have to say. New York is back with wonderful people, and it's in my blood. I love New York.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge
Mhm.
and wisdom. We appreciate you, and we'll let you know when this goes live.
Thank you.
Thanks.